Disclaimer: the guests on this show are not liable for any statement made by its host, nor is its host liable for the statements made by his guests. We are, each and every one of us, responsible for our words alone as much as we are entitled to our words. This divine ownership is an inalienable right and our birthright as human beings. At the same time, people are not their words. Nobody is either completely static or one dimensional. Opinions and sentiments may vary from day to day, from recipient to recipient, and from domain to domain. You will never know another person as they know themselves, so to equate someone to a single statement they made is erroneous, as it is unjust. Here follows a free conversation between two complex individuals, and if you want to prohibit this exchange of words and thoughts, you are the one who's dangerous, not those who are about to engage in dialogue. Richard Grannon is a YouTuber, content maker, and author, particularly known for his expertise on complex trauma and narcissistic abuse in romantic relationships and family structures. I have been a great fan of his since probably as far back as 2017. He has helped me a great deal in understanding the underlying dynamics that govern relationships between personality disordered individuals and their families of origin. I love Richard's humor, his intelligence, his eruditeness. I greatly enjoy his dissections of the true nature of codependency, the con aspect of psychotherapy, and his philosophical analyses of woke culture, fascism, and communism. I also greatly adore his impersonations of Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Žižek, two thinkers from opposing ideological realms that frequently enter Richard's analyses. I believe Richard and I both have a great interest in the mythical, the symbolical, the allegorical, and the archetypal, the Jungian school of psychoanalytical thought, so to speak, as well as the greater philosophical and artistic implications of archetypal allegorical thought. I greatly enjoyed this chat, even though I was very tired at the moment of recording, and when I get tired, my command of the English language tends to deteriorate greatly, so I kindly ask your forgiveness if at times I stumble or search for words. I could tell from our conversation that Richard and I both agree communism is more dangerous even than fascism, purely on the basis of some pragmatic aspects. A favoring that, moreover, naturally only applies when you are not Jewish or gay or someone of color. And concurrently, I also believe to notice that Richard, even though agreeing with my notions on communism, still has not fully let go of the leftist fight for justice in his heart, which I am grateful for. Grateful that, in spite of all contemporary left wing and right wing postmodernist insanity, some people still cling to old fashioned notions of righteousness and hope, because not everyone needs to be as depraved and cynical as I am. Well, Richard, we've had a bit of a correspondence as an introduction.
Yes, sir.
I've
Yes,
been
sir.
deeply immersed into your material for, I would say, the better of 5 years, something like that.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So the
Very
first
cool.
thing, yeah, well, I actually went through a lot of craziness and trauma in that period, and of course the COVID insanity and all the world insanity on top of it. So it really was a loyal friend to be able to dig into these
Yes.
videos. Which brings me to the first thing I want to discuss is the fact that I've been listening to your stuff for hours and hours and hours, walking in the park, doing groceries, all sorts of stuff, which like ha ha ha, laughing with Richard's jokes and oh, thinking out loud with Richard, and which made it feel like you were my friend. And at the same time, I very often thought like I don't know even know this guy. So there's thousands of people who feel like Richard Grannon is their friend while he hasn't met them.
Yes.
What's that like?
Um, it's fine for me. I don't mind. I had the same experience with Slavoj Žižek, and then I finally met him in a Starbucks by Birkbeck University. And I walked up to him while he had a mouthful of sandwich and said, "I really, really like your work," and shook his hand. And he went, "Yes, yes, yes, fine. It's very good. Thank you." And he was very nice and very Slavoj Žižek about it. So it was nice that he's the same in person as he is in the virtual reality. But yeah, it's okay for me. Um, People don't always say hi when they recognize me. I'd rather that they just say hi because otherwise they just stare at me for too long, and I'm like, do they want to rob me or have they been the victim of narcissistic abuse? I don't know what. Don't quite know what's going through their heads.
And does it cause confusion? Like,
You mean for them?
yeah, in the sense that when you have these courses or when you have a micro following in this like a loyal micro following, and you get into
Yeah,
contact with these people, for example, you do podcasts like we do, or you get acquainted with
yeah.
these people, do they do you get that more often that there is a felt intimacy there, like a one way kind of advance in knowing you, opposed to the fact that you have not met these people before they were introduced to you?
It's a weird kind of micro celebrity, yeah, because the people who are my followers probably, and we know this from the statistics that have been reviewed from the channel, they've probably listened to really like tens of hours, if not hundreds of hours of my voice running in their heads. So as you say, it's a small following, but the people who really like my stuff, they've been talking to me a lot, and usually it's completely fine. Sometimes people do act a little bit strange when they meet me, but I can't imagine. It's kind of hard for me to imagine what it's like from their point of view. And other than like when I meet people like Slavoj and other people, I've worked with, I've coached people who are sort of famous. I've coached people who I've been a fan of. And I always try to think, I just think like old fashioned manners and politeness really save us in those
Mm.
circumstances. Because I have all of my feelings and I've had dreams about Slavoj Žižek. I mean, he changes the way I analyze everything. He's very far upstream in my analytical matrix because I'm always using a virtual avatar of him to check. Like I'm like, what would he say about that? What would his likely perspective be? And so then in real life, it was like, okay, you're now intruding in his reality of chicken sandwich in Starbucks or something. So just be brief and be nice and shake hands. And then I got to see him deliver a lecture. So and most people are. They're very polite. They're very very nice. Occasionally, people try to be cool, which is weird.
Yeah.
which is like socially awkward. Somebody recently in a hotel in Dubai hid behind a bush in a hotel, and then his friends were like, "Oh, you should come and just come and meet him." And then when he came and met me, he was kind of like trying to be a bit cool. It was really strange, but yeah, most people are fine. Most people are fine. Structures are good. Boundaries are good.
And good old English politeness saves the day.
Yeah, English politeness, Japanese politeness, German politeness. There's certain nations that are known for having that like quite highly structured way of interacting. And I think it comes down to like long term military histories where if people take things the wrong way, they'll knife each other to death. And then we lose good writers like Christopher Marlowe. We lost him in a knife fight in a pub brawl where he got knifed through the eye, the author of Dr. Faustus. So yeah, like politeness and boundaries, it really protects us. It's really there for my protection, your protection, everybody's protection. And I never had to think of it until I became visible, until I became recognizable in the streets where people will walk up to me in the supermarket and say hi.
The funny thing is when you like smile and through smiling produce this dopamine, so like dopamine release, like faking the smile and then invoking a
Yeah,
certain parasympathetic reaction to that. It kind of reminds
yeah,
me of that because even when someone who's really polite, and especially if like British or American people are like formally polite and they go through the steps and they thank you for everything, even though
yeah,
you know it is a formality and maybe not as doesn't carry as much sentimental weight at the one moment as it would the next. Still,
yeah,
even though it is a formality, it still kind of disarms you, or you still feel this, this little relief. Oh, yeah, that's nice. That's
yeah, yeah. Little things mean a lot, especially when we don't know each other. I mean, humans. I think it's almost like a biological genetic instinct, which is worth saying now because eventually we'll cover racism and xenophobia. We can't avoid it. But there is a biological instinct to be fearful of strangers. Strangers potentially carry pathogens and viruses and diseases that your tribe don't have. Strangers can be scouts. Strangers can be saboteurs. So these small symbolic gestures. I just have done a very stressful drive from Dubai to Abu Dhabi. It's now 10 o'clock at night, and I wasn't in the best state when I got out of the car and started to speak to the receptionist. And then I for a moment, I just thought, you're 100 kilogram white guy who's not smiling. What can you do now? So I just said to the girl on the desk, I was like, oh, what's your name? Oh, your name? That's a really interesting name. I really love that name. That's a beautiful name. And that just, the interaction just went in a very, very different direction. It was a small symbolic gesture. And she lit up. Now, I'm sure if you asked her rationally, is this guy like, how authentic is that interaction? She'd be like, no, it's part of a formality. But even, this is the Slavoj Žižek point,
hmm,
even the symbolic is real. It's
hmm.
as real as anything else. These are like false dichotomies between the real and the symbolic, and real world and fantasy. These are false dichotomies. It's all real. Of course, I'm not asking about her name. My subtext is I'm not in the best emotional state, but you're on an 8 hour shift or a 12-hour shift. So let me just reach out and say, hi, human. Hello. I know
I
that
I,
this isn't your
I see
fantasy.
you. I recognize you.
Yeah, I see you. I see you. There's no way this was your fantasy when you were growing up in Rwanda, was to be a hotel receptionist in Abu Dhabi, but here the fuck you are.
Exactly. Oh, so what brings you to that region? Sunlight?
Sunlight is important. I really am beyond exhausted with the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
I haven't given up on Europe as a whole. I still consider myself. I'm proud to be European. I'm very proudly European. I do think that I've traveled a lot, and I think Europe is one of the best places on earth. I think everybody agrees, and that's why all places on earth try to copy Europe. I am not proud at this moment in time to be British. I'm not proud of the United Kingdom and the way it's acted in the last, let's say, 30 years. And I'm sick of dealing with the side effects of being there. And I am very privileged in that I'm privileged and lucky in that I worked really fucking hard for decades. That's my privilege and my luck. So I can afford to say, okay, I don't want to live here anymore. I'm going to go and live somewhere else that I feel has some hope and some optimism and a clarity and congruence in a vision for itself. The United Arab Emirates, like Saudi Arabia, is responding rapidly to a changing world and doing something about it. The United Kingdom is not proactively doing anything. It's on its arse, putting out fires, sort of trying to stay afloat. But I think what will sink it is a lack of will. A lack of will. I'm aware that this can sound a bit right wing and nationalistic and all of that, but I truly believe that I'm not that way inclined. I'm not an extremist in any sense. but I really feel that the United Kingdom has lost its will to live.
It's funny when you started about the UK, your dislike and feeling like it's a sinking ship. My first association was like, do you mean like the Brexit thing or other developments in these same decades? But you're
Um,
because I always think it's quite funny that Britain insists on not being Europe. Like, oh, we are not Europe,
no,
the continent,
that's yeah, I know it's absurd. It's absurd. It's part of our little Britain attitude, and we have you've probably know of it. It went viral. There was a TV show called Little Britain
yeah, sure.
that is now just 10, 15 years later is extremely politically incorrect and extremely problematic, but in which we were satirizing our strange little island mentality. No, I grew up in Portugal and then in Spain. I've lived more in Europe. I've lived as much in Europe in my adult life as I have in the United Kingdom. I'm not for or against Brexit. I kind of feel like Brexit is a red herring. I love Europe. I have no love for the EU, for
Exactly.
the Institute of the EU. And I feel as though Brexit, well, one of the legitimate parts of Brexit was to say fuck you to the EU, and the EU deserves to be told to fuck off. I mean, it's outrageous. It really is. It's outrageous the way it conducts itself and what it's become, what it's mutated into. Where it's had so much mission drift
Which is
since
really
its formation.
weird
Yeah, it is. It is, and
because it's not a
we all just
democratically consensual kind of. It just evolved into this super integration, which is also mostly undemocratic, which is really weird because how did it got?
okay. So I because I'm tired, I could
Sorry.
ramble and you're keeping me clear. I'm sorry for vaping, ladies and gents, but I need drugs now to keep going. Please forgive me for my vape. Um, yes, drugs.
We're both a bit tired, and
So
that's okay.
so to the point of the EU that it's completely non-democratic. You've pointed to why I ultimately made the decision to leave the United Kingdom, and that was because of the pandemonium of the last few years. And I said multiple times, if we no longer live in a modern, Western, liberal democracy, I would at least like you to have can I swear on your podcast?
Of course.
The fucking decency to say so. If the dream is over, tell me, because I've lived in countries with extreme policies before, but they don't lie about who they are. You know, Malaysia doesn't say we're a modern Western liberal democracy. They never said that when I lived there the whole time I was there. And some of the things that they enacted in law are, by our standards, pretty outrageous, but they didn't lie. The United Kingdom is not a modern Western liberal democracy in any sense, and I refuse to pretend that it is, and nor is the EU, and I refuse to pretend that it is. It can be what it wants to be, but like I'm not playing this stupid zombie brainwashed game where I have to act like it's still 1985 or 1975. It isn't. It isn't. The world has moved on, and the power of these institutions is monstrous. It's absolutely monstrous. It's not justifiable. It's not. It's not acceptable to me that the power is being handed out in this way. And what can I do? You know, I'm just one guy, and so it's sort of like a nationalist point of view. If you really don't like it here, then why don't you piss off somewhere else? So I pissed off somewhere else. I really don't like it. I really do. I think what happened during the thing that we can't talk about because we talk about you can get demonetized and maybe have your channel shut down because we live in a modern Western liberal democracy. Ha ha ha.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we may no longer mention, I was appalled by the way the United Kingdom responded to that. Absolutely disgusted. It was a disgrace. It was an absolute disgrace the way we responded on every level, in every way. But whether you're pro or against, the response was just mind-numbingly incompetent.
And exploitative and corrupt.
100%. 100%. These people, If it was a war, they would be tried as war criminals. We've never faced this before. I want to call them war profiteers, but they're not profiteers of war. I want to call them that word, pandemia,
Hmm.
pandemia profiteers. That's what I want to call them. And I want them to be tried harshly. Billionaires were created through deception and delusion and hysteria. These are warlords. This is an oligarchy. This is feudalism. And all the fucking peasants in the United Kingdom would go out on a Thursday evening and clap the National Health Service, which is a state owned department. That failed. It was failing, and we were clapping it. I'm not blaming doctors. I'm not blaming nurses. I'm talking about the government. It's a state owned entity. And why did we were told in the United Kingdom you had a different narrative in your country, but you must do this because if you don't obey, the NHS will collapse. So the government was barefaced just saying, we've underfunded the NHS for a real and present danger that we've known about for decades. It now can't cope with the threat that we've been warned it would face for decades. Please go outside and clap. Did you know we were clapping in the streets for the National Health Service?
I believe I saw something
What a
about that
dis-
on you.
what a fucking ridiculous Orwellian, nonsensical, obscene gesture. We clapped whilst people died. We clapped whilst, you know, incredible things happened. And there was just the most appalling transfer of wealth as well, apart from the human suffering, the economic suffering that will be counted now in decades. And I just said, this is not acceptable. When I get the chance to leave, I will leave. I'll choose a country and I will go. So that is what I've done.
Well, you can count out the Netherlands because they've completely drowned in the same period as well. I did think for slightly
They
different reasons.
they tried to imprison me in the effing airport. The Dutch. They tried to keep
Oh,
me in the airport.
I remember
Do you
that.
remember that moment when Brexit
With the handsome guy,
was finally
the dumb
enacted?
handsome
It was
douanier, right?
yes, that's it. Yes, the dumb and handsome CrossFit boys of the Dutch police, beautiful boys. They wouldn't let me in, and so they tried to imprison me in the airport. And there were many Brits who were under house arrest in the airport. We'd come back from Los Angeles, and yeah, they said you can't leave this airport because you're not vaccinated and because of Brexit. You must stay here. I mean, I managed to talk my way out, and they said, "Do not leave this airport under pain of arrest." And I was like, "Okay, I definitely won't take my luggage now and leave the airport, get in a fucking taxi, and go to the hotel I've booked. I promise you, I won't." And I just fucked off and got in a taxi. No, I know in Holland it's in the Netherlands it's just as bad. It's just as bad. Well, it's bad. Well, you have a whole other raft of issues. But I think the point remains we are no longer living in modern Western liberal democracies in any meaningful sense, and we should stop pretending that we are.
And it's really freaky how over the course of the last decade, because I was in art school and I saw the postmodernist stuff take over, the prelude to
Yeah.
the woke communistic type of thinking,
Yeah.
the identity politics and such. But I didn't
What did
recognize
you study? What were you studying?
playwriting and later screenwriting. Some glue after just to hit it off, upper
Listen,
and
I'm
down.
from Liverpool, and this is how we do it. Just a little bit of glue, just to take the edge off. You have the mind of a writer, that's for sure. The notes that you sent me for this interview, I mean, we couldn't even cover a quarter of it in an hour, but it is the makings of a book. There's a lot of really, really interesting talking points there. So
Thank
I
you.
wasn't sure what you studied, but screenwriting, okay, that's interesting.
It is, especially because I've heard you complain a lot about like bad screenwriting, especially in
Yeah,
Netflix, which
yes,
is entirely a product of postmodernism as well, in the sense that it was part of the postmodern discourse to renounce the authorship. So the
right,
what you of course you've covered this topic a lot, and so has, for example, Jordan Peterson or Slavoj Žižek extensively, and it is a hot topic. But what people tend to forget is the what it did to the arts, because we evolved from, like, let's say ancient allegorical art to religious allegorical art to, let's say, Renaissance art, romantic art, and then modernist art. And then somewhere post 1970, it just went cuckoo, and it went completely full blown conceptual postmodern Dada,
Yeah,
like a shit fest. And that
yeah,
happened in every discipline, not to the same extent, of course. In the fine arts, it really exploded, and that's the cliche that everyone knows. These documenta kind of postmodern conceptual artists. But for example, within theater, it has emerged as well. And what that produces is that it becomes the realm of the director, because the director is like the manager of the multidisciplinary um, blob of nothing really matters. It's all material. It's all texture. There's no author, and especially like
yeah.
like Aristotle, like begin, middle, end, catharsis. That is like frowned upon. That is poopy from the ancient times. And now we go into true poopy. We celebrate real poopy. We make very ugly and incomprehensible things, and we celebrate ugliness, which is also a part of postmodernism. And I really came to fucking hate directors and producers because of this. I really detest this like woke privilege kind of thinking because I'm so tired of it, and it's so infantile in its execution. But there is something um like what as they construct, for example, white privilege versus, for example, black underprivilege. There is
Yeah,
really a thing like director privilege.
right.
So everything that is more classical, writers as a genre of disciplines, or specifically as a discipline as playwrights or screenwriters, are exploited and not valued in this system. And that is what creates this pyramid where the producer, of course, when it considers films or series, is the money guy and the organizing principle. But artistically, the director has always made the artistic principle, and is also the one who makes the choices artistically, and who eventually gets the most credits. And I think this is uh, yeah, it's just a change from where playwriting, screenwriting came from. For example, in the time of Chekhov, you just had a gang of actors, and the best actor or the most competent actor to do so was the director, functioned as the director, and they just made a beautiful scenery. I'm not saying we should go back to these archaic, the dusty bullshit on the stage,
Yeah, yeah,
but this is the other end, and I do think, because you, I believe, in that particular, I think it was a tentacle croissant episode, or when you were thinking on like following your train of thoughts, you said it's so ridiculously obvious how bad writing generally is, while some of the other faculties that are used in film or theater sometimes are on par. So
yeah,
why do they do that? And I actually, and you were like, oh, maybe they're trying to keep people dumb. Well, there is this very obvious ego thing as to those directors and producers don't mind their privilege, of course, because they are making careers on them.
yeah,
And I do think writers are generally I'm not saying every writer, I'm not saying me, but I think writers as a class of people are generally more dangerous to any establishment than our directors, because directors tend to be a little less intelligent than writers, especially if you take the beasts like Tennessee Williams or Shakespeare or Aaron Sorkin. And when those arts operate in a healthy way, they can function as a fifth power, as does journalism. But journalism has totally become taken over by this Frankfurter Schule kind of march through the institutions, as has journalism. And I think
yeah.
this is one of many vehicles that has castrated the arts, so to speak, which is
Yeah, it's
my
interesting that,
take.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's your writers manifesto. Rise up, writers, and
I,
protest. Well, we already tried that, and it didn't get you anywhere, did it?
no, I didn't.
There was a big Hollywood writers protest.
I gave up completely. Well, in the Netherlands, it's really odd. I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but in the Netherlands, everything is subsidized. We are a small country, small language area, so only the Dutch and the Flemish, and to a lesser in Belgium and a lesser extent the Surinamese speak Dutch.
Yeah,
So it's 17, 18, I believe like 19 million Dutch, 10 million or
6 million Flemish, and that's it. So it's a very small language area, which doesn't, it's not like we are the lingua franca like England. So we watch a lot of American and British stuff, Canadian stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think
Yeah.
you watch a lot of Dutch stuff in reversal, obviously. And that makes for a theater world and a film world and a series world, which is, of course, rather limited. But there's a very obvious comparison. If you look, for example, Denmark. Denmark is a country which is culturally very similar to the Netherlands, even more so than Germany, I would say. And which is also significantly smaller, not in terms of size, but in terms of population. I think it's like 5 or 6 million Danish and small 20 million Dutch. But they make so much better movies than we do. So if a country has 6 million people as opposed to 20 million people, they have a smaller GDP, they have smaller tax earns, they have smaller budgets, they have a smaller talent pool to choose from. But still, they make with 1/4 of the population, they make 100 times better movies, actors, and I think that has to do with the degree of decompensation through postmodernism. I think discipline. You started this conversation with politeness and discipline, which I have another angle I want to explore, because I think the fact that England has become so incredibly woke. Because I've heard some crazy stories about you guys over there. I could imagine that politeness also is a perfect segue in which this weird woke cry-bullyism nestles itself. Because the strength of the English or the Chinese or the Japanese are that they really know how to do this courtship. They really know how to do the social formality. But at the same time, this politeness also stands in the way of a certain healthy cynicism. Would that be a viable theory, or am I off here?
No, I don't think politeness stands in front of a healthy cynicism. I think in order for the politeness to survive, it requires a healthy cynicism. Otherwise, it will descend into political correctness. It will just be weak. Because you have to be polite but cynical. You have to be polite but knowing and worldly, and knowing when not to be polite. That's all. That's all we're missing at the moment. Literally, that's it. The woke were always there. They've always been there. We just used to fucking ignore them. Woke concepts have always existed, especially amongst the young, amongst teenagers. We just used to tell them to piss off and grow up and ignore them. And then for some reason, that healthy cynicism started to disappear. The capacity to say no, piss off and shut up and get on with your job disappeared. And guilt and shame took its place.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a number of factors. I mean, the video that you would have watched a bit of this morning, the preamble, is I do firmly believe that if there's chapters in history, there's a doctor I work with from Dr. Paul Taylor, who's a philosopher. He's been teaching me about something called epistemes, which is Foucault's idea that in certain chunks and chapters of history, we have a way of knowing epistemologically what's going on. And this one isn't closed yet. We're still in the chapter of Stalin and Hitler. We still live within that period. And I think that had a huge impact on us. I think we're in shock. Maybe not as a species globally, but I think certainly in Europe, because the war was here. It took place, okay, yes, North Africa and Japan, okay, fine, but mainly here. And we struggled more morally and philosophically with World War II than World War One, even though World War One should have been more of a shock because of the jump up in military technology. And I think it was the positions that we were put into and the decisions that we were forced to make and the compromises that we were forced to make. We felt collectively as Europeans shocked, traumatized, riddled with guilt. And the reaction has been to extreme collectivist ideologies that are nationalistic and very confident and very certain, is to say, okay, never be nationalistic, never be confident, never be certain, never be decisive. Any sign of empire building or colonialism, tear it all down. and don't have a national identity, don't have a national idea, because the bad guys, that's what they had from, Pol Pot and, to, I don't know, Mussolini. So let's get rid of all that. And unfortunately, nations don't survive like that. If we said as banks, if we were all banks, and we said, well, after the 2008 crisis, it seems like if you lend money to people and take a risk, any risk whatsoever, bad things can happen. Right. We'll never risk again. We'll never do any lending whatsoever if there's an element of risk in it. And the economy would grind to a halt. That's what's happening. You can't have a nation with no identity. You can't have a corporation or an enterprise that can't tell you these are the core values that we stand for. And we, the government, and the dopes within the government are actively working to promote those values, and you, the people, can see it. No, we don't have that now. That's gone. I mean, that's considered literally Nazism. You say that, it's like, oh, that's literal fascism.
Which is so ridiculously. Don't you sometimes just get berserk with the lack of historical or any knowledge? It's like you're talking to people who are 2 years old. Sometimes
this is being driven by so-called academics who have the mentality of ignorant pig farmers from the 14th century. Their worldview is so disgracefully parochial. They are, sorry, but they're morons. They don't understand statistics. They don't understand history. They don't understand geography, but they're bloody certain about all of it. They're bloody certain that they're right about all of it. From where?
And
it's nonsense.
But shouldn't we then, for example, say that academia and activism are mutually exclusive, or let's say academia and ideological presupposition? Because I think it's really, really weird. My father is an epidemiologist, and so I know a little bit about the scientific world, and it has some resemblances, at least here with the art world, because it's subsidized based. So you have a lot of people whoring for subsidy, which is not a pretty sight either. But well, that just is. But I think I know a little bit about the scientific principle through my dad, and I think it's really odd that a institution, which is, for example, English universities or Dutch universities, who are aligned with medical universities, so universities that are based in hospitals, for example, or other professions. Heart transplantations need to work out well. Roads need to be built. And let's take a more baseline thing. We need to have a consensus about the biological nature, for example, of female or male or other baseline realities. Yeah. And the sciences emerge, of course, in the Enlightenment period, let's say from 1400 onwards. And the oldest of the disciplines within the sciences are, for example, astrology, but also anatomy, medicine, biology. At least is 200 years old, like Darwin and his prerequisites since 1800 onwards. So the oldest of these disciplines joined up with more recent spin-offs of these disciplines, such as neurology, neurobiology, psychiatry, etc., etc. They very firmly state that on a neurological basis, a chromosomal basis, a hormonal basis, a organ basis, a sex organ basis, etc., etc., etc. It is very clear that men and women differ in these ways quite profoundly, are also very similar in a lot of ways, quite profoundly, and that is very clearly a evolutionary functional property of the human species, like as every other mammal. And then you have these other disciplines like gender studies, women's studies, XXX studies, where sometimes a lecture is being taught, for example, Judith Butler or Naomi Wolf or more Foucault or more Marxian Lacan, among which there are phrases like XX is a social construct. And they have beautiful epistles about why that is. Probably some of them are very wise. But it's very weird to me that a institution that is a science institution finances and harbors disciplines like sociology and gender studies, which have been taken over by hardcore Marxist, postmodernist radicals, anarchists, who are openly, who are ideologically opposed to science, who say science is a male construct of oppression and is false because Indian ways of knowing or etc. are equally valid. I'm not trying to mock that, but my point is it's under the same roof, and you have
Indians don't use it. It's not mockery. Indians don't use it. Indians aren't breaking their legs and saying, "Oh, please take me to the doctor for some Vedic medicine." They're some of the fucking best doctors in the world, and they're in your country and they're in my country. They don't use. Exactly. I mean, you might use Vedic medicine to avoid ill health, or Taoist medicine to avoid ill health, or indigenous Native American medicine to avoid ill health, or to feel good, or for your mental health, or for your fine. But when we break off effing legs, or you're having a difficult pregnancy where or childbirth, and you might lose the child, do you want social constructionists to help you with that? Do you want Marxist postmodernist surgeons, or do you want the best surgeon for the job to save you and to save your baby? And all these fucking liars and hypocrites, if it was down to them on their doorstep, their womb, their child, their brain, their leg, they want the best. They don't want the best representation of diversity. They don't want to choose the black or Chinese doctor if we're in a majority white country, or if we're in Uganda, they don't choose the white doctor because that's the more diverse thing to do. They want the best fucking doctor for their child or for themselves. Of course they do.
To have
these people are hypocrites. Sorry, just to finish this point, even the people you're talking about, even they don't fucking believe this shit, and they're still forcing it on everybody. I know that they don't believe it. Everybody can see that they don't believe it. Their actions belie them. They are liars. You said it's strange that these academic faculties fund it. It's not strange, my friend. It's criminal. It's criminal because the consequences will be ill health and death. Ill health and death. It's criminal what they're doing. It's medical malpractice writ large. We're both familiar with the other topic that we haven't mentioned yet, where we can see the manifestations of this. It's medical malpractice writ large. Let's call it what it is. It's criminal. I am not in a mindset or a mode or an emotional state anymore where I'm trying to build bridges and become an ally or try and reason with these people. I'm not reasoning with them. They're lunatics. And that's okay. They've always been there. Just why are we choosing to let them decide what the policy is? Take it all away from them. There's no question to me whatsoever, to come back to your earlier point. Academic institutions are not a place of social activism. If teachers are found indoctrinating children, and they are children, then they should just be fired. Simple. And if the university won't fire them, defund the university. Simple.
Exactly. And don't allow for disciplines that harbor anti-science.
No, and it's not. Look, some people watching this might think I'm some sort of right-wing conservative. Look, if I went into your school or somebody goes into your school and starts spouting right-wing, ethnocentric nonsense about the superiority of races and this, I would say fucking fire them as well. I want the children who are in academia with their open minds and their lack of critical faculties, people like me when I was 19 and I went woke and I was a social, justice warrior activist or whatever, I should not have been indoctrinated in that way. It's morally wrong. If a left winger was going to get hold of me and indoctrinate me, show me the right winger who's going to give me the opposing point of view. I'm 19. I don't know anything, for fuck's sake. But I don't have anything. I've never had a job. I've never run a business. And you tell me that white people have destroyed the world and that the reason why there's poverty is because of capitalism and greed. How can I fight back from that? I just go, yeah, that's true. Then when I went and traveled the world, I went, oh, I have been lied to, not misguided by the education system, totally fucking lied to my whole life. And I can take people to countries who make these absurd claims, who've never bought a ticket and been on a flight anywhere further than probably fucking Tenerife. And I can take them to places and say, okay, now repeat what you told me in London about the way Britain is. Now that we're here in this other country, now that we're here, you said that England was the most racist place on earth. Look around you. Tell me now about racism. Talk to me. You ever seen a concentration camp inside the UK? You ever seen people being massacred for their religious beliefs in the UK? Well, here we are in another country where it's happening. Tell me again how Britain is the worst place on earth. It's ignorance.
And
It's ignorance.
it hammers home to the thing we corresponded about just before just this afternoon, about either the dichotomies or the false dichotomies. Very interesting topic. If they really cared about slavery, they would try to stop slavery in Dubai, Ethiopian slavery, or slave selling in Libya. If they really cared about women's rights, they would go to Egypt or Saudi Arabia. If they really cared about Nazis in concentration camps, they would stop the Uyghur concentration camps, who are there right now in China, etc., etc., etc.
Well, you want them to do something. You want them to not be on their iPhones and on Twitter every fucking day sipping their gingerbread lattes. What are you saying? They have to go and risk their health and safety, spend their money, and go and do something that's real, that's happening now, that's a 3-hour flight away. No, 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 no. Let's talk about things that happened 300 years ago to people long since dead that we can't really track back, and the things that they suffered. It's this. It's magic. It's sort of magic in the worst sense. It's magical thinking. It's religious, the worst sense, religious, dogmatic, or orthodoxy at play that's going on right now. And you must have the mindset of a village idiot farmer, peasant from the 14th century who cannot read. I honestly, I'm like stuttering with exasperation. We've never had so much knowledge. We've never had so much ability to look things up. Does any fucker who gets into an argument online look things up even once? They're on Instagram, they want to argue. They can't even be asked to open another tab and even check it on Wikipedia or the first 10 entries on the first page of Google. They can't be asked to do it. It's to me, that is completely unforgivable. And it's really simple. They don't have the right to speak. They have the right to speak, but they don't have the right to demand to be obeyed. Let me be careful with my words. They do not have the right to demand to be obeyed, and we should ignore them. We should just say, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's simple. A woman is a female, a biological female, an adult, biological adult female with a womb, as opposed to a male, and they exist in polarity, and it's very, very simple. Watching leaders of modern Western liberal democracies, like I think it was the Australian Prime Minister, a clip of him a few days ago, refusing to say what a woman is. Just refusing. He's like, well, I haven't prepared my answer to this question. You haven't prepared your answer to the question, what is a woman? Are you fucking stupid, mate? Give up, go home, resign today. If you have any shame whatsoever, resign. It's the thing that bothers me about this is we talk about it as though it's maybe we should, no, 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 no. This is an extreme issue with extreme consequences, and the idiots are clear to see. I really think, like, enough. We've been patient. We've been nice. This has been going on for years. Enough. Just, it has to stop.
But why doesn't that happen? That's so fascinating. We see our disciplines decline. We see art, journalism, politics, democracy. We see all these very important institutions, which are unique, which are hard fought for through trauma and shame, through genocide, autocracy, and poverty, as have many places in the world are trying to aspire to reach a certain state of wealth or liberty. You see a culture just ignoring idiots, diluting that, perfectly knowing that there can be a slight hazard to that. If you talk to Polish people, for example, my girlfriend is a quarter Polish. She went to visit her relatives there one day. I had shitty jobs in recent years, and as you know, a lot of Polish people work here. One time I was working in this, that's a failed screenwriter's debut life in the Netherlands. This is what this looked like. I was in a shitty suburb of my city, in an industrial area, folding laundry, which was for elderly homes. So it was completely filled with shit and pee. And we had to make these bundles, wash them, not properly washed. A lot of haste. Few older Turkish Moroccan ladies, and one Polish woman who I thought was hilarious because she was like almost 60 years old and she was smoking hot, which was absurd. She was literally like
Oh,
this bombshell.
God bless those Polish genes.
Oh man. Like she still had like this, she was dancing, folding the laundry. I think she was like 57 or something. Very like Hooters style, like bombshellish Marilyn Monroe hot, loving herself for it and dancing. And I was like, okay, my life, I need to do something about my life. I'm stuck in this Camus play all the time, in this Kafkaesque, like weird situation. Well, I was discussing the woke stuff. It was like 2019 or 2020. And I was like, don't you think it's absurd what is happening around here? How do you view these developments in the Netherlands as a Polish person? And she said very simply, well, you guys had Hitler, but we, after Hitler, we had Stalin. And that's just it. We have this blind spot for the dangers of the left side of the spectrum, which can evolve exactly similarly to Nazism in just a different form.
I think it's an incredible part of European history that nobody seems to know. Well, nobody seems to know except in the countries where this took place, of what happened after World War II. Like the vision seems to be, oh, the Germans all just got beaten and went home back to Germany. We didn't give half of Europe to another fucking psychopathic madman in exchange for peace. Like that's, oh, just wipe that one as the cut. We beat Hitler, we beat the Nazis. That's all you need to know. And then it's the same thing with the Czechs. They're so brutalized by what happened under the Russians after Hitler. They don't even mention the atrocities they suffered under Hitler because the latest trauma, the Hitler trauma, went on for 4 years. That's where I'm sure you know. I'm just saying it for the viewers. Czechoslovakia is where Hitler built most of the armaments and the armored vehicles and the tanks. The Czechoslovakians were enslaved because they were considered Germanizable. That's why they weren't killed. And Hitler wanted to take Czechoslovakia as part of his Lebensraum policy. He wanted to make Germany bigger. That was his primary objective. The other things that we're told about Hitler are true, but that wasn't Hitler's objective. It was expand Germany, make it bigger. This is great. Why don't we be bigger? And these other people, they're Untermensch. We don't like them. We're not going to have them. These other people, they're okay. Czechoslovakians, they're Germanizable. We'll keep them. They were brutalized. The Germans experimented with mobile gassing units that would fit one victim at a time, and they used that on Czechoslovakian children. If Czechoslovakians rebelled or shot their officers or engaged in insurgency, that was the standard punishment. Or they would hang them. Children they would hang. But Czechs don't talk about that. Slovakians don't talk about it because that's covered by what came after, which is the Russians. It's incredible the amnesia we have. And what right do we have to this amnesia? It's the Europeans. You fuckers, go to fucking all the Yugoslavian countries, go to Slovenia, go to Croatia, go to Serbia and Bosnia and look and ask. Go to Albania, go to Romania. They're fucking everywhere. Go to even Macedonia was touched by this. Ask the people there. You look in their eyes and you have a good fucking look and see if communism had an impact. These are countries that have had their souls ripped out. The people are still walking around in the days. The thing I love about Albania, they hated communism so much that they'll tell, I don't know if it's true, but they'll tell you when they put the churches and the mosques back up, it's a lovely piece of solidarity between the Christians and the Muslims. They deliberately built their churches and their mosques side by side in case the communists ever came back again. They would fight them side by side, Christians and Muslims fighting back the communists if they ever came back. That's how much they suffered under that regime. No, but as Europeans, that's all blah blah blah. It's all gone. We all forget that. And I'm not playing this stupid game of left versus right because I don't consent to the idea that that Stalinist, let me be clear, is left wing and that Hitlerism is right wing. I don't consent to that. I think there's pretty good arguments to say that that's not the case. It's not so clear cut, and it really doesn't matter. Totalitarianism, violence, the demand for absolute obedience, not just by your action, but by your mind. Your mind, your emotions must obey. or we'll kill your kids. These aren't different people. They're the same fuckers. They're
Well,
the same. They just
I,
have a slightly different manifesto.
I think they're essentially exactly the same. But I actually believe that communism is more dangerous than what is called fascism. Because what is fascism? Because Nazism was national socialism, which was essentially a very socialist movement, but in its execution very Spartan and race obsessed, so right wing in that sense. Then you had fascism, which you had in Italy, and then you had different brands of communism or socialism.
Sorry, could you just clarify for the audience? At that time, the writers of the time did not consider Nazism fascism. Fascism was considered a separate ideology. Most people, like for example, Carl Gustav Jung wrote at that time. He was clearly divided between communists, socialists, fascists, and Nazis. It was considered another entity. People, this is a rewriting of history afterwards. Going, oh yeah, they're fascists. At the time, they didn't see them as fascists because, well, it was the workers' union who's doing it for the workers. It was Hitler's revolution. It was it's national socialism. And as far as I remember, the last time I looked, I think socialism is left wing, but I'm not 100% about that.
It is, but it's a difficult one. We have a party here, which is of course a controversial party in these times, has been for 2 decades now, called the PVV, the Freedom Party, led by Geert Wilders. And I think not that he is a Jew-hating, genocidal maniac, not at all. I believe he is even married to a Jewish woman. But he has the same, that party has the same makeup. It's socialist in its essence, but it's very focused on immigration, on Islamization. So it has the same nationalist. Well, it's what the word says. It's nationalist and it's socialism, because the original communism, not only socialism but specifically communism, of course, is international, which is part of Marx's instruction manual.
Yeah,
it should be a transnational liberation of the proletariat.
Yeah,
and it should be a class and race transcending movement. That's why they tried to. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go. Just for clarity, that's Stalin, not Lenin, right? Lenin, I think, was like, I think he had a change of mind and said, okay, let's make this for the Russian people. Our communism, the Leninist communism, was for Russia, and then Stalin said it should be transnational. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was the difference between Stalinism. Certainly for Marx, ultimately for Marx, it's transnational. It transcends all racial boundaries, ethnic boundaries, gender everything. It's for everyone.
Of course, and then it becomes kind of a semantic discussion, because you could also oppose it with, let's say, American capitalist imperialism, which was a force at the same time, equally powerful, which also tried to fought proxy wars, as did the USSR, over inspiring nations to become either capitalist or turning communist. They hoped for insurgencies in these European nations, Asian nations, to tilt them to their side. So I don't think that's unique to communism, except for the fact that Marx intended communism to be a transnational, transracial, transclass kind of movement, a universalist movement, a globalist movement.
I interrupted you. The point that you were making was that you felt that communism was more dangerous than Nazism, I think.
Well, then what is generally lumped together as fascism? Yeah. So let's say true Italian fascism, autocracy, and monarchic despotism, if you like, and then not national socialism, as we saw in Germany. I'm not saying.
Can I ask you specifically what you mean when you say dangerous? I don't disagree with you. I'm just looking for a bit of nuance. When you say dangerous, what is
I'm looking at it as a purely practical.
Okay.
As like empirical. If you look back at all fascist manifestations and all communist manifestations, there's two factors, I think, why the one is more dangerous than the other. The Nazis had a form of thought police. They had a very harsh intelligence, brutal intelligence police. They, of course, were very brutal and repressive and had this weird tendency to like breed a perfect nation, and like the women should do aerobics and breed perfect blonde kids and all that nonsense. But they would rather have Jews to leave and communists to leave than later having to gas them. They would have preferred that in a certain sense. Well, I'm not sure if that's true because they love to, of course, exert their hate. I had this one note which I wrote after my ridiculous barfing all these ideas into your email inbox during work time, which was that I think what makes, yeah, I think this is my point. Communism is more pathological. Nazism is more hateful. And I think it is in the sense of communist pathology is because it tries to, as in 1984 with Winston, it's not enough that you are that you obey or exterminated or dominated or accept yourself as an inferior race or whatsoever. In communism, we have to enter your mind and your soul while we break your spine, and then we release you, let you tear for Big Brother, and then we shoot you sometime later.
Is that communism or Stalinism? There's no doubt that what you're describing is Stalinism, that for multiple reasons. I don't think anybody would argue with you that that is absolutely a good description of Stalinism. Total submission, just like 1984. It's not enough that you say that this is four fingers when you see three. You must make yourself believe that it is the correct number of fingers. Stalinism or communism, sir?
Of course, if people start to experiment with these ideologies, you get different like tastes of gelato. You get like more stracciatella or more like chocolate, whatever. But it is a phenomenon that you see erupt in many communist histories. The Eastern Germany, Stasi, contemporary Chinese Communist Party went to oh, you did bad, minus score. Camera dog films you on the street, scans your mind. Now you cannot pay with the credit card. So this absolute control, which is not only like brutish and domineering, but which is quintessential. You all must be the same copy of each other, like ant people all together, and then we still want you to be afraid and love us, love Big Brother. And I think what results, the result that you get from that type of ideology is that these countries become prisons. This is one of the two factors why I think it's more dangerous. China, North Korea, Stalinist and Leninist Russia at the time, they were prisons. That's why these tendencies that happened during the COVID time, vaccine passports, so that you cannot transport within Europe or even within, for example, the states of Germany or the Federation. My aunt studied Russian in the 90s, or no, in the 80s in Moscow. I've been to Moscow with my aunt when I was 12 for a whole month. And she, of course, had studied there. She speaks fluent Russian. She's a Russian translator now. And so she had a real Russian network of old friends, which for some odd reason were all Russian artists. Failed or not, I can't tell. So really melancholic fatalists, drunk people. I love them. But the atmosphere, that was 2001 or 2001. So let's say 10 years-ish after the true disintegration of communism. Well, you see these absurd, brutalist, shitty concrete towers, tens of miles and tens of miles out of them, because Moscow is like a 20 million people city. So it's endless walls of depression. And then you have these people who are still a decade, maybe decade and a half after the decline of communism and eventually the fall of communism, are still so afraid of their neighbors that if you ask them the way in the street, they're like, no, 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 no. And when you hang out with them, because you know them through and through, they warm up quite easily, because even though it's a cold country, they are warm-blooded people in a sense, far more than the horrible Calvinist Dutch. But they will change like 180% when you enter their front doors, or when the front doors are closed behind you, and we always assume that the room is not bugged. Then a whole different mentality opens up. And I remember these vibes that you got in the street, and the aftermath of this repression. It was really thick in the air. Now, of course, I think if you would walk around 1947 Berlin, post-Nazism, it would also have quite a thick atmosphere. But I do think there's two components which make communism even more dangerous than Nazism. Not like in a comparison of like worse or better, or they're both very equal in nature. I do agree with you. But you can just look at history. Those countries that that went like full blown communism, full blown state control communism, they became prisons and they lasted for a century. And all these Nazi countries, they were horrible, or these fascist countries, they were equally horrible in many respects. Sometimes even more horrible because, well, in communism you also had concentration camps, you also had genocide. Some of them were ethnic. You had people experimenting on children. That all is not known in the West. The death toll and the internal genocide, like the democide, is so much more huge in these, especially USSR and China histories, than even both world wars combined and fascism combined. That is something that is not known. The mass of the mass murder and the mass of the internal repression was huge. But you could also argue Russia is huge, China is huge. They have very brutal histories. So there also could be a culture component underlying their susceptibility to communism or a certain form of communism. You could argue about that. But these fascist states tend to last shorter. They get toppled earlier, either intrinsically or from the outside, and they are not prisons in the sense that some communist countries literally become, because you cannot leave North Korea. You could not leave Russia at the time.
I'm sorry, somebody's trying to call me. This is my employee. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
Oh, go ahead.
So sorry.
No problem, mate.
I do apologize. I just said to him, listen, I'm still on my Zoom meeting and I'm using my phone. And he went, oh, I'm sorry. I said, so please fuck off. Please go away. I
Both
want to
time.
ask you,
Yeah, sure.
I want to ask you, have you identified what it is in communist ideology that leads to what you've described as a higher degree of genocide, a higher degree of invasion of the human psyche, and you describe these places as ending up as being more like prisons than fascist countries. What is it in communist ideology specifically that leads to that outcome, do you think?
I think the emphasis on egalitarianism and collectivism.
Why would that? Why would egalitarianism and collectivism create those outcomes?
It's a great question.
This is like doing therapy, but it's politics. Let's rehabilitate.
It's policy, yeah. Or theoretics.
Politics.
It's a great question. I just think when you look at history, you see, for example, Stalinism, Leninism, Mao's China, some countries in Eastern Europe. And then you also, if you go back a little further in history, you see the French Revolution. You see the Spanish Inquisition. There are these psychotic moments, and not all of them are particularly left-leaning or to be identified with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Spanish Inquisition. That wouldn't be a leftist revolutionary. That was I think that was a response to a genuine in their eyes threat. To somebody, people were doing things, and I have my own theory. It would take us off in a completely different direction. I just wonder: is this communism? Is this something that's in the Communist Manifesto, or something that's in the communist worldview that would make these outcomes inevitable? Or is this a corruption of communism? I don't say it as a defendant of communism. I think it's a silly idea. I think Marx was a silly, very intelligent and very irresponsible man, but he was a good analyst. He was a good analyst of the problems of capitalism, and he had
Yes.
wonderful ideas. It's just his solutions were just very well enough.
Well,
What
we should not
what is there?
we should not forget that some of these fascist ideologies, especially Nazi Germany, were anti-capitalist as well. But they identified capitalism as like Bolshevist Jewish Wall Street and Moscow, Bolshevist Russia. They identified it with the Jews and as like this weird paradoxical relationship that it had with capitalism, but Bolshevism did. But they did not applaud capitalism. They were very protectionist, like, for example, Trump now tries to be. They wanted to be a self-sufficient, protectionist economy. And they disliked internationalism. They disliked some aspects of global trade, and they disliked banking, and they closely associated it with like a Jewish conspiracy.
Who, who are you're talking about Nazis right now?
Nazis, yeah, not National Socialists. But there is a clear anti-capitalist element in many fascist ideologies as well.
Has, just to take a slightly different tack, has communism ever been achieved in the world, do you think?
Yes, I do. And I think that the naivete of hoping that communism could be possible.
Where's it been achieved, and when has it been achieved?
Okay, let me first off say what I personally, as a person, believe is the ideal or the best
Go ahead.
imaginable we have had. I'm not saying
Go ahead.
I don't have a
Go
glass
ahead.
ball. I think the best we have had is the post Second World War period, let's say 60s until late 90s or early 00s in countries like North Sea countries, as mine as yours, France, some other countries, and maybe in South or more prosperous countries in Eastern Europe that have developed nicely. Social democracy, a mixture, a annoying, tedious mixture of democracy, rule of law on a capitalist grid line with very strong socialist interventions. I think we have not done better than that. I agree. I miss that.
I think it's shit, but it's the best shit we've ever come up with.
Exactly. I miss it like the most insane girlfriends I had the best sex with.
So
I don't miss the past itself, but I miss this bliss point.
So capitalism, but capitalism disciplined with socialism and balanced with socialism.
Exactly, and I think we should be very careful. What is capitalism? I think we should be very specific about what is capitalism. Capitalism is not money. It's not trade. It's not many instruments that we deem capitalism to be, like inequality or selfishness or oppression, either independently or coupled with trade or economic means. They're easily 20,000 years old. So that's not new. What was unique about capitalism that emerged in our countries? Because capitalism is entirely an Anglo-Dutch invention. The capitalism we mean is the resurgence of financial instruments that emerged from the Reformation in the Netherlands, Germany, England, and subsequently a reallowance of, for example, usury, a upcoming of colonial trade, so a upcoming of a middle class that was not aligned with the old feudal structure. So a new middle class that wasn't clergy class or whatever, but was like, we call them the patriciërs in Amsterdam, like the golden age. I'm sure the England had an equivalent of that. And from there, by the Dutch East India Company and later stolen or improved upon. It's of very competitive history, of course. But the English and the Dutch expanded on this Hanseatic trade with new instruments, with the reallowance of usury and the invention of many financial constructs, which honestly also invited an entire economic boom of the West ever since, but created a lot of problems. I think the foremost ones are usury again, so the abuse of money creation in whatever form, debt, huge problem, of course. And I think the most important, the one thing I think in which way Karl Marx, especially Das Kapital, of which I have only read 40 pages, which gave me a massive headache, as did Nietzsche the first. Yeah. It always hurts a little bit the first time, you know. But I was really amazed. I agree with you. What I've read of Das Kapital is an absolutely brilliant analysis of the structure and ills of capitalist industrialism as he saw it at the time. And I think one dimension is still very relevant. I'm not saying like the themes of inequality or wealth distribution or the way we regard these elements are still, of course, they will always be relevant, as will its conservative or liberal counterpart. It's a spectrum. It's not a googie for all the googie babies out there. It's not like, oh, the good guys, the bad guys, oh, some guy invented it. No, it's the evolution. It's a spectrum. And they need each other. They love each other. They're in an abusive relationship. They beat each other up every day and they fucking love it. But I do think one aspect is still very relevant, and even more so than Marx could ever realize, and that is commodification.
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing, it's a very easy cliche thing. Oh, like mass consumerism, which you should make a art piece about it, like we do a little, mob art on the central station. It's of course it's very very glee, but of course there is a very real problem with capitalism. But what is that? You know, what is that? What it's not trade, it's not money. I don't necessarily want to return to trading cows for beads or something. Even though I think there will be a resurgence in that if we hit a big mass recession. Because, for example, I saw this documentary about Georgia, the country, and they trade in their currency, of course, and in dollars, of course. They also trade in potatoes. So I saw this documentary about this guy who was like in his van. He toured these villages, these poor villages up in the mountains, and he sold them like clothing or cat food or whatever. And he was like a little Kramer, you know, a little hustler. And I was so amazed to see that they have these scales, these like butchers have, where with a hook where you can hang something like a piece of pork, but also something else to measure pounds, and they just measure sacks of potatoes, and they it's a currency there. And it's just a little tangent. I think we should introduce when the hunger will start. I think we should pay in potatoes. We have plenty of those in the Netherlands. But I do think commodification, you know, all this it's a crazy thing. We're living in a time, and I think that with the COVID thing, for example, it was the first time in my life that I saw how politicians and the people got their news from and communicated politically, in a sense, through the algorithms of Facebook and other social media. Facebook became the news because you watched the news on Facebook.
100%. But I asked you when communism had been achieved.
Well, I think communism is so pathological because it denies a quintessential structure in human nature and nature in general. And I think
sorry, I meant has like Russia was clearly not communist, China is clearly not communist, Cuba is clearly not communist. Is there a country that you can point to in any time and place and say that was a communist country?
Well, I think exactly those horrible and less horrible examples are all communism, because I'm more cynical about it. I think when you try to implement a society which is devoid of hierarchy, you're trying to achieve something which is impossible, which is as much of a fetishist split lie as you talked about earlier. So this repression of reality leads to the repression of or the subversion of reality in every speech, that's why they want to get into your head. That's where it's born. And that's why it's so deadly. Same with Christianity. I actually don't dislike every part of Christianity or of the Christ figure and the story, but I do think absolute altruism or forgiveness is equally unsustainable. And the Christian legacy, the Catholic legacy of murder in the world has also been unprecedented among other religions. So I think where the inversion is the greatest, the pathology is the greatest. So I do think those are examples of attempts to communism. And
there are examples of attempts to communism, but these are countries that still use money. They're not communist. They have a police force. They have a state. They're not communist. They can't be communist. They can call themselves communist if they want to, but they're not actually communist, are they? They haven't achieved utopia.
So what would be more communist? For example, this small native tribe in let's say in the Amazon or in the Congo that lives on hunter-gatherer basis in a very small community. Might they be able to achieve something communist-ish?
You've rushed ahead of me now. You've gone to where I was going to go to next, which is okay. Before we go to your small tribe, let me ask you this: if these so would you consent that, or concede rather, that maybe these countries, whilst communist in name, are not really communist? They're still awful. I'm not saying that they're great. They're still bloody awful, and I still think communism is a stupid idea. But this is the point I'm making. It's a stupid idea because it's not achievable, and nobody's achieved it. If you have a currency, you're not communist. If you have a police force, you're not communist. If you have a state that tells you what to do, that ain't communism. Would you consent? No.
Those letter points. Didn't Marx ascribe for the centralization of power through the state, and then the appointing of, like, let's say, a new ruling proletariat, which should have been enforced through violence? I'm not even. I didn't read the Communist Manifesto, but I thought
no. That's a transitional state. He said that's transitional. So in the communist utopia, you're no longer. That's kind of it's his transitional states of socialism. Yes, the violent revolution will be necessary. Yes, people will need to have roles and they'll need to be paid. But ultimately, you have not achieved communism until there's no money, no police, and no state. So that's Marx, and most communists would agree. Like you, in what sense is China fucking communist? It's produced more fucking billionaires in the last 20 years than any other country on earth by far. That's a great communist. That's a communism I can go for if it's going to make me a billionaire.
But China is really fucking terrifying because China paved the way, and you can tell. And I don't want to get all tinfoil heady on the Klaus Schwab shit, but you can tell that, let's say hypothetically, I don't have I don't hold the truth, but if there were generally totalitarian tendencies within formerly super democratic Western Europe, they embrace this hybrid with the most wet anus they could ever have. Oh, dude, I love that. Oh, we can mix.
It doesn't even need lubing up.
No, it's just gaping with the threads. You know, just gobbling, waiting for it.
No, so my when I've thought about this and I've thought it through, I've thought these countries that have been through whatever they've been through, they can have whatever anthem they want, they can wear whatever uniform they want, you can slap red stars on people's heads if you want to. This isn't communism. I'm not a communism defender. My point is that it's utopian. The whole thing is a child's fantasy. It's never been achieved because it can't be achieved. So these people are stuck in their transitory state and calling themselves communist. And we, as the critics of this, should point that out. We should point that out. These are still highly capitalist nations, and they're highly hypocritical. Marx posited more than one form of communism. He was a tricky fucker. There's 8 different styles of communism, at least. There's probably more. And you said the primitive tribe. He called this primitive communism. Primitive communism. And I think that personally is the only time you can have what Marx was referring to with communism. He made a mistake. And all the communists are making a terrible mistake. You can only have this because what communism needs is someone or something to say, Comrade Dirk, it's your time to wake up and go and clean the sewers. Who's going to tell you that? A human? A human can't tell you that because that would be a hierarchy. You should spawn in true communism. See, even communists don't know this. In true communism, we as a collective, as humanity, without the evil of capitalism, will be infinitely good, and we will respond systemically, and we will simply have a collective drive to do good. And you'll just wake up and go and clean the sewers because you know it needs doing. That's what you're supposed to do. Without that human nature impulse, you kind of have a sci-fi movie in which an infinitely intelligent artificial intelligence that watches everybody says, this is how you will be rewarded today, and this is how you will be punished based on, your work, which is from everyone according to their ability and to everyone according to their needs. That's Marxism. How do you do it? So you either need a supercomputer if you're in a nation of 100 million people, or you just have the tribe. And because we're all wearing a loincloth and grass skirts and we all live in huts and we can all see and hear each other, we know that Ugg didn't clean the latrines. And we're going to shame him. And because he only lives with 50 fucking people, that shame is compelling. We don't have to threaten to shoot him. We don't have a police force. If Ugg doesn't do it, he doesn't get fed. He's shunned. There's instant punishment. And if he does do it, there's instant reward because it's tribal, it's primitive. I must share your tools. You cannot hunt today because you're sick. Don't worry. The last time I was sick, I ate from your hunt. Can I use your spear? Because you're not going to use the means of production today, comrade. Can I? I wouldn't even need to ask. You'd be like, take it. I'm going to lie here and shit myself all day. And next week, when you need it, I'll take care of you. It's the only, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we talk about communism as though it is a thing when it isn't. The effort to drive towards communism is the problem because it's either a sci-fi novel or it's a post-apocalyptic fantasy. If we lived like they live in the series The Walking Dead, then you can have communism. If we have an infinite, benevolent, super intelligent supercomputer, then you can have communism. If anybody can tell me in the comments how else we can do it, I'd love to hear it. Who the fuck is going to govern this thing? Oh, no, sorry, you can't have governance because as soon as you have governance, it's not communism.
It does sound very infantile in a way. Also, maybe even from the Marx get-go, because admittedly, there of course are small in a large part of the human evolution. All people lived in like these 100 to 200 people bands.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have to say that what you described there, like this, Ook didn't do the laundry. Now we're going to look at him all day. It sounds really Dutch, so I'm not sure that it sounds like heaven to me.
The Dutch are still running that experiment.
Oh man, I was I started to study in Leiden University, which is a university close by here, just to try to get into teaching was my plan. To get more of a...
Yeah, you should actually. You'd be a great teacher. I hope you continue to write as well. I just want to say, and communistically, I hope that you put it out there for free so that people can get a taste of it and then maybe find a way of monetizing it afterwards. That would be cool.
Sounds great. I'll just send you a copy. I'll be communistic. I hope I keep on writing myself, but it's a more desperate inner hymn. No, I kind of lost my thread. What were we talking about?
Calvinism. Sorry.
Yeah, I love to hate Calvinism because the Dutch are actually one of the most insane cultures on earth, like on par with, for example, the Japanese or you name it.
I'm so glad that you're saying it.
Well, I have some things to say about the English as well, but there is something particularly...
Bring it on.
That's your part. I started studying English literature the other day because I thought like I have previous schoolings in playwriting and screenwriting. I did the screenwriting masters, not physically, but online at the UCLA, at the University of California, Los Angeles. So I had this bilingual literary track. And I thought, like, well, what would be a pleasant and fast lane track into teaching? So I found out, oh, there's this master's, this pre-master's in English literature. I was loved Anglophone literature most, all literatures, especially English, South African, and American. So I thought that would be an easy ride. Well, goddamn, when you're at this age and have to work for days a week and have to study, and it's completely woke. I was just so shocked of how woke it was because I was in art school when woke started, and I was in art school again when woke had gone on the way, well on the way. But this was just English at university, and it was like 60 or 70% of the auditorium of all the people watching had a professor, had purple, green, or blue hair, and everyone was this insane blob. And the amount of crybullying and craziness and the activism within the curriculum. I came here for, yeah, sure, the great vowel shift and a little bit more Shakespeare and some of the classics I was too lazy for at playwriting school to really read them. The Greeks love it. I'm ripe now. I'm ripe now, Daddy. Feed it to me, you know. But half of it was like it was all about slavery and how literature should be used to fight climate change. And if there's anything we could discuss activism, we could discuss right wing, left wing socialism, the merits, the demerits. But if there's one thing that's absolutely true in this life, Richard, is that there's no such thing as boring as politicized art. It's so fucking lame.
I had to say this the other day to somebody, a friend of mine. I really love her dearly, but she's quite strongly feminist. And we were talking about sex. We ended up having a very frank conversation about sex, sober, believe it or not. And I said, there's nothing more fucking boring than politicized sex. Political correctness will destroy your sex life. It will destroy everything that happens in the bedroom because all of your human impulses are taboo breaking and extremely politically incorrect. It's the essence of human sexuality. Political correctness will destroy sex. Sorry, so you said the same thing about art because you are a more refined and noble individual than me.
I would just say that these feminist girls, they're not banging the soft boys who want to write a contract first. They're not.
Well, and I did tell her that. I did say you're 100% right. I said you're saying one thing, but you've also told me who you like and what. I mean, in some cases, like yeah, like guys who are not. Let's just leave it out. Not soft boys, not gentle boys, like quite rough chaps. So how do you square that circle? And I'm not judging you. I think it's cool. I think if I was a girl, I'd be the same way. That's who I would want, like a strong, masculine, decisive guy. That's what would probably sexually arouse me. That's fine. But you're doing one thing and saying something else. So yeah, sorry. To your point, I agree.
Well, let me ping pong it back. I think that is exactly the fetishist split that everyone has been pushed in for some odd reason. Whether it is COVID, whether it's feminism, whether it's the polarization, whether it's everything. It's people are in violent war with to subvert reality or internal realities.
Yes. So the fetishist split is for your viewers is a Freudian concept, but Slavoj Žižek developed it to say that the fetish is that you know very well that what you're saying is not true, and yet you behave in every single way as though it is, in a way to kind of try and make it true, and that creates a fetishized split inside of you. So when we say fetishist split, that's what it is. Everybody knows perfectly well that this isn't real and it's not true, but we really, really, really want it to be. And if we keep hoping and keep praying and keep imbuing it with energy, maybe one day it will be, which is the fetishism of it.
Exactly. Earlier, you asked me about the difference between communism and fascism, and I think there's something very banal to it. Especially you asked out loud, why are Europeans so oblivious to the realities east of Berlin that happened?
Yeah,
and the unparness of these atrocities to the atrocities that we did experience firsthand or secondhand in Western and Central Europe. through Nazism? And I think the answer is so super banal. Because I think for most people, they're like, oh, injustice. And I was like that. I was a pre-borderline adolescent person on planet Earth who had nothing to lose and everything to gain and who owned nothing and who hated his bourgeois middle class background and at the same time belonging nowhere. And that infantile adolescent rage merged with this young predisposition for noticing injustice and still having energy. I, at this age, do not have the energy to consume alcohol anymore because I'm like half dead after 2 beers the next day, let alone saving the world. So there's something that dies quite, some realism that sets in. But there is this pathology that hooks on some people, and I think it translates into this. Other people have more than I do. Other people are more successful than I am. I am afraid of my own potency, and I'm afraid to find out that I might not be as strong, talented, intelligent, perseverant, lucky. There's that as well. And because I'm so afraid of playing the chessboard, I just throw over the chessboard. I don't want to engage in chess. I'll just throw over the chessboard. That is Marxism, and even more so postmodernism, to deny the game. The fear of one's own potency and the fear of finding out that you're inferior to another person in whatever respect, or that you wouldn't make it in life. People are so attached to this notion that it's not their fault. Where they are in life, it's not their fault. Because when they're talking about the oppression of women, the oppression of Jews, the oppression of blacks, the oppression of third world by et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're always, in a way, saying, I am not responsible for my failure. Because if they would really care, they would go to Saudi Arabia and fight for women's rights, or they would go to liberate the Uyghurs. But they are so attached to this notion, this infantile and borderline-esque notion of, I can never accept that my shitty life and my shitty being is perhaps because I'm not Jesus Christ Superstar or whoever. I'm so afraid to find that out, that performance and inequality are bad. And I think people are so devoutly attached to that notion, because if they would have to give that up, what would overcome them? What harshness, what release of hope, release of resentment. So they can't. And that's why for 60 or 70 years, people have refused to see the atrocities of communism.
I think what you just said, you said it very succinctly. It should be either the introduction video for your YouTube channel or at least a YouTube short, because it was good. So I hope you timestamped that. It was very good. I agree with everything you say. I think it's a kind of absolution of responsibility fundamentally. And I don't think even Jordan Peterson has put it that succinctly, but I think that's his frustration in academia, is that all of this is a sort of shell game and a distraction, because basically you don't want to sit your exams. You'd rather have a demonstration than study. You'd rather engage in social activism than be tested and find yourself wanting. And this is a great excuse. It reminds me of certain friends I've had in my life who had potential and chose to sit around playing video games and smoke pot. And when I asked them why they were doing that, they said, well, the whole system's broken anyway, man. It's full of corruption. And I'm like, that's not the justification for doing nothing. Or it could be, but it could also equally be the justification for choosing to work really hard and try and change the system. It's a false logic. It's a post hoc justification for something you already wanted to do anyway, which is not be tested or sit around and smoke pot and play video games. It's a way of absolving yourself of responsibility. I am going to have to go soon, but I don't want to blue ball your listeners. You say why the Dutch are weird. I'll say why the English are weird. And that's how we should conclude this.
Yes, that's what I came for. Fuck communism and all that.
Everything else was just the clearing of the throat.
Exactly. Just enjoy the decline and make things more banal. Enjoy me.
Yeah.
The English. Go.
Uh, I don't really know. I don't really know what we are anymore. The English. I don't feel comfortable in the company of English people, and I don't think they're comfortable in my company either. Either. Um, because probably they can feel me silently judging them. But I'm bewildered by English people. I'm bewildered by the English perspective. I'm bewildered by English fixations. I'm not interested in what they're interested in. And I find, I'm sorry to say, the English perspective nowadays largely very depressing. It's very competitive. It's very backstab. It's very individualistic. It's extremely greedy. So often it's fame obsessed. Um, and I can really see junk values have taken hold of British culture. It's still a beautiful country. It has a great history. There are wonderful places there. There are wonderful people there. There's plenty of art and literature that we've produced that it really is the best in the world. I don't deny it. But British culture in 2023 is the hot garbage of Satan's arsehole. I mean, what culture? It's crap. We're obsessed with crap. We produce crap. It really is a country that I think has lost the will to live. And the woke ideology that it's so greedily embraced is just the suicide pill that it's selected to swallow to kill itself with. I have a very, very dim view of English culture. Tell me what your impression is of English people. I grant you permission.
Thank you. I want to emphasize that I thought that was a beautiful phrasing, the suicide pill they chose to commit suicide with.
Oh, it
Beautiful.
was good, that wasn't it? I was quite proud of that.
Yes, it was really good. Let me tell you about Dick and Judy. When I was in high school, we had these every so many years. We had this trip or this exchange. I was in a school that offered a bilingual program, so we got percentage of our lessons taught in English, and that way we were connected to other schools in Europe which had the same program. So we went to Denmark, very crazy country, very ugly language, even more so than Dutch language.
I was
Spain.
going to say that's rich coming from a Dutchman.
Well, the Dutch are like North Sea throat cancer. But the Danish just refuse to pronounce the word. They just refuse. And Dutch is ugly, but it has a certain. This is this hate-love relationship. Like I hate the Dutch for being so square and so OCD and have to overly organize everything to make everything literally not only square in like the metaphorical sense, but like quadrate a quadrant, like four-ish quadrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
Quadrangle, maybe.
Yeah, but there's also a certain cateredness, a certain cadence in the language, which I do think has a certain beauty. I'm digressing. I was going to talk about Dick and Judy because I thought you had a really beautiful, serious epilogue again about the decline of English culture. But I was more interested in like why quintessentially, not 2023, but also 1998. Why are the English crazy? Because I think they're quite nuts in their own little way. And one thing that really stands out for me about the English is that they, even more than the Germans and the Dutch and the Belgians, they just don't know how to cook food. That's one thing. Why?
Oh, God, having it. Well, the only good thing you can say about that is that we openly welcome foreign cuisine and we're very, very open minded with foreign food. When I meet Pakistanis here in the United Arab Emirates, I tell them that our Christmas meal was Indian food that we cooked, but our Indian food is actually Pakistani food. The majority of immigrants in the so-called Indian restaurants are actually run by Pakistanis, and they don't believe me. They say, no, 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 you're British, you must have a different cuisine. I'm like, no, we eat your food. And individual family members have like a speciality that they can do. But English food is bloody awful. Yeah. It's, well, non-existent or awful.
Yeah, there was this one school trip we had to Cambridge, and me and my classmate Jasper, we were 16 or 15 at the time, and there was already this dynamic in class where we're always stoned or skipping school, or especially in certain classes we just get into these laughing fits and pure adolescent behavior. We got into this trip and we already had this like contagious laugh between the two of us. It's just a little detail that's important to the story. So we went to Cambridge, and we had as a host family Dick and Judy, elderly couple, sweetest people in the world. So, but so fucking weird and so English, like Wallace and Gromit, Mr. Bean English. And I remember one of these first days we went to this Cambridge choir, of course, beautiful Gregorian cathedral, and we got into this laughing fit because all these choir boys singing so high, like they were all castrated. It just got us going, and it would be the first meal with Dick and Judy, and Dick. Every night he sat me down on a couch and he was obsessed with Dutch, of all places, Dutch medieval history of a certain period, very specific. And he opened these big books and it was like, oh, look at that. You have these counted in. It was just the sweetest autistic guy. And then you were Judy, dear Judy, you know the drill. And this one night, we were sitting at dinner and they had cooked this kind of pizza, which was like like a plate of vomit. And Dick was talking about the beer he was brewing himself in the shed, and about Dutch counts. And Judy was cackling in her particular way. And I could see Jasper across from me at the dining table. He was just, I was feeding him with these glances. I was stoking him, and he was just turning purple with suppressing his laughter for the sheer oddity of it. And then at a certain point, I asked something to Dick, and he was eating his pizza, and he spat a big piece of pizza on Judy's glasses. And they didn't notice. And Judy was, oh dear, okay. And they were being so quintessentially English with the disgusting food. And we excused ourselves, and we went up the stairs, and we both peed in our pants at the same time, entering the privacy of our dormitory. And it's just a beautiful story. I'm getting a little tired, but I think which I initially wrote you, I think in the oddity competition, I think Dutch and English would be very close.
Yeah, it's a strange nation. There's a series, you can look it up on YouTube, called The League of Gentlemen. And it's like Little Britain. We're very good at satirizing our own strangeness. The League of Gentlemen really goes into how odd like little English villages can become and the characters you find there. It's a very, very strange place. Okay, so now you get to say what you think is odd about the Dutch. What's wrong with the Dutch? They're fine.
Well, they're Calvinist. And you could be a third generation atheist because we turned quite agnostic and atheist most and first of the European countries. I believe we are the most atheist country in the world, probably. But everyone 100% is 100% Calvinist. It's so bred into the meat. And Calvinism is like the most hardcore form of Protestantism with the most self-hating streak. And it turns people in the most square, self-controlling. That was why I started the thread about Leiden University, because I quit after 2 months because the woke stuff just really got to me. I was like, no, fuck this. I can just earn money and I'm not going to do this. But I did like some of the books I was reading. So even after quitting, I just kept on reading them. And one was about Renaissance, the Renaissance effects on literature and poetry in England. And I really liked it because it dealt with some aspects that I had been too lazy to study in previous years. For example, the classics, Greeks, but also the Reformation. And it really accurately described the history of the Reformation. And of course, that started in Switzerland, Germany, Holland, and then England in that order. And England has had a quite different history with Protestantism because it didn't fully turn Protestant in a way, because Anglicanism is like a Protestantized but compromised semi-Catholic kind of mixture. But it described very well Luther and Calvin and the whole bunch, and it described especially Calvinism. And I imply you to read it one time about the tulip principle, like the core principles of Calvinism. It's like everything is human beings are all going to hell, and everything is lost, and you cannot go into heaven unless you are this small group of preordained people who might get into heaven, but probably will get to hell as well. And everything that is carnal is sinful, which is a Christian concept like on crack in Calvinism. You cannot enjoy yourself because that would be vanity. So it's a hermetic form of Protestant Christianity that I say is just such a prolish rape of Christianity. It's so goddamn square. And what a typical thing in Holland would be the cookie basket. So if you go to a typical birthday with aunts and uncles in the province, so to speak, all these people like Peter and Wilma and Honey would be in a circle. It's tradition. They would have apple pie and coffee or whatever, and then the cookie jar would go around, and the cookie jar is always like very minutely filled with just the amount of cookies for the guests. And dare you take more than one cookie out of the cookie jar? Ugh. We will stab you to death with a spear. No, they're too soft for that. But there is this concept of soberness, and I don't mean like mental sober, but
restraint.
Yeah, restraint, sober, not in the state of not being intoxicated by alcohol, but more like the things being sober, the grimness. There's a concept of grimness. You have to self-constraint and constraint lust, envy, sexuality, pleasure, even, which makes for you could almost say a kind of communism avant la lettre, where everyone self-polices, not to take too much space, and always be self-cynical in a certain way. It's a little hard to explain, but I think.
Oh no, I know what you're talking about because I've tried dancing bachata, which is it's a Latin dance, it's a Dominican Republic dance with Dutch girls, and I've wondered for years what the fuck is going on with Dutch people. Are they comfortable in their own bodies? Are they allowed to dance in their country? Is it illegal there? And even when they laugh and they're happy, they immediately twitch and sort of do this weird thing. And I'm like, is autism a part of the national identity? They're very physically shy as well. There's a physical shyness.
Definitely. Well, Dutch people, especially above the rivers, as we call it, because you have like the Rhine and the Waal, a few very big delta rivers emptying in the North Sea, kind of like halfway an altitude in the country. And south of the rivers, that used to be the southern lowlands, including parts of Belgium, which of course are Burgundian Catholic still. They, in the Reformation battle with the Spaniards, they remained their Catholicism. And then you have the northern Netherlands, and they are Protestant, but even more so ethnically, they are Frisian, Saxon. They are actually the ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons in a way, because those people were from the same North Sea coast. Well, definitely do the Dutch, as do the Danes, Germans, and Scandinavians, have this Nordic autism. It's obvious. It's also probably like a lack of sunlight for 30,000 years and bad weather.
Yeah.
But I do think, for example, the English are more like a mix of Germanic, Celtic, Viking. They're a little bit different in their origins. But I do think, in general, I think this Protestant. I know you are quite critical of Catholicism and your experiences with that. But if I had to choose, it's a very easy choice. I do think that for all its ills and ridiculousness and plated gold and pedophilia and mass murder, just as a religious culture, I kind of like a little gold and red wine and a little pussy eating more than I do pulling the plow myself naked on a rainy field in northern Germany. You know, I do think that
I wasn't aware that we had pussy eating in Catholicism per se and as such. Is that ordained by the Pope or?
But you are
Is
truly
that
from.
something that you on the outside imagine we're doing inside of mass?
I think that this is the fallacy of fantasizing about the greener grass, not
It's
knowing it for
better
sure.
over there. There's pussy going on over there. There isn't.
I just associated it with Italy and France and Spain and how they.
Oh, I see. Because it's Italian and French, that means
I'm imperfect, Richard. I perfectly understand.
these barbarians are making love with their faces. I did just want to clarify the physical shyness that I've seen in Dutch people is true up until you get to the punching and the kicking. If it's kicking the fuck out of you, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and MMA, that physical shyness goes away. But I presume that's part of this Calvinist ethos because there's suffering there, there's rigorous training there, and repetition and purity. That's an acceptable form of touch.
That's a very interesting angle. I have no experience with that whatsoever. I do
You
think
you produce good. You produce very good fighters. Very very
we
good
do.
fighters.
Oh,
For
well,
a small country, it's strange how many very good fighters you've produced.
but to be fair, are they not, for example, Dutch Moroccan? Because I know that we have a large Moroccan minority community, and they tend to produce a lot of kickboxers, for example.
You've got you've got mixed guys who've come out, but also just plain Dutch in Muay Thai, going back to the early '80s, and they were the first Westerners who were they were quite courageous in going over to Thailand and learning directly from the Thais, where other people thought that was a little bit of a wild thing to do. No, you've produced very very good fighters, but it might be part of this Calvinist thing that you're talking about. I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to have to go soon, as I
No
promised
problem.
to meet my friend here. Is there anything we should cover briefly before I bugger off?
No, I don't think so. I think
We can do this again. You wrote me like 4 dissertations worth of topics. I think we covered 2 sentences of it.
we left on a beautiful what do you call it? Cliffhanger for the next one. And this Catholicism versus Protestantism insanity within Northern Europe is something
Well, I
I'm
almost don't want to
speculating.
disillusion you of what Catholicism like. You've got a version of Catholicism in your head that I'd quite like you to keep. You seem perfectly happy with it.
I just try to escape anywhere, Richard, even if it's false. That's my fashion. I just
It's
want
some
to
sort of
live in a van.
bacchanalian, wine-fueled oral sex orgy in your head. I would enjoy that religion too. Sign me up. That's great.
But have you ever seen these Protestant churches in the Netherlands and Germany? These deliberately grim, concrete, ugly places.
Yes, we do have the nice cathedrals. The really and spooky and evocative of imagery and history and magic and mysticism. There's no doubt. We're way more mystical. It's way more appealing to the imagination, without a doubt. Especially when you go to the cathedrals in like Portugal and Spain, where it's all very fleshy and graphic and 3D, handsome, beautiful, priced, ripped, muscular, being whipped and chained and all this stuff. There is that fleshy side of, there's a carnal element there. That's
No, I know.
absolutely, you're right.
I think what I think is more healthy about Catholicism, even though of course it's an insanity in itself, but more healthy than Protestantism is I think that there is this hypocrisy in it. So there is this like, oh Father, I have sinned, and then I go to confession and I drink a little wine and drink a little Christ and in the beautiful gold-plated cathedral, and then I walk out and I'm good again, and I'll just fuck my mistress again and go to confession.
Yeah, yes, we have a release. We do have a release that you don't have. You're hermetically sealed, as you said, whereas we do. Yes, we can do that.
Exactly, and as the same way, I try to compare, for example, communism with fascism in an empirical sense. Like the one is a prison, and the other one is less so. The one lasts 100 years, the other tends to last a decade. In the same way, I could say, like in Catholicism, you have more beauty and more just the churches are more beautiful, the countries are more beautiful, the mentalities of the people who are Catholic in Southern Europe are far more healthy than the life mentalities of the people who live in North Sea Germanic Northern Europe.
And interesting that fascism, proper fascism, Franco and Mussolini fascism, took place in these took hold in these Southern European predominantly Catholic countries. Maybe a
Got
good
me
place
there.
to start in
You've got me.
the next. Yeah, you're sold. He's like, take me. Yeah, red wine, beautiful women.
I'll just convert. I'm a fascist, everyone. It's clear.
I think we should. I actually didn't get to. I've just been reminded now. I wanted to say that I also have more fear of communism than I do of fascism. And I would, if I think they're both awful collectivist ideologies. They're an abrogation of responsibility. They're infantile. They're utopian and intrinsically violent. But were I to choose which state to survive in, I would choose fascism. And maybe that's an interesting clickbaity place to start the next talk from, is why would you choose to be the victim of fascism over the victim of communism?
Exactly.
And I do have some reasons for that. That might be an interesting place to start from.
With the one very important caveat that most people in Eastern Europe say they found communism more brutal than fascism, and they would prefer fascism, Hitler over Stalin. But it's never the Jewish people in Eastern Europe that you've asked that. If you ask,
yeah, no, because
if you ask a Jewish person or a black person, they may have a different position.
I said surviving. So I was very careful to say.
No. But I mean it as an extension of, yeah, like for example, as a generic white person in Europe, I would also hands down choose fascism to survive in, because I think it would be less intrusive to survive through and more survivable and would last long, probably.
I'll controversially state that if I was stuck in Uganda and it was overthrown by a communist or a fascist party, I would rather justify my existence in a fascist court than a black ethnocentric fascist court than a communist one, which they did, of course, have down there. There's so many teasers that we're leaving hanging. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you for having me on. I hope we can do this again soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, sir. Speak to you soon.